What if the modern state didn't emerge from war or ideology, but from merchants, markets, and money? In this video, we're going to explore some of the economic theories of state formation. These approaches argue that the state evolved in response to changing patterns of trade, finance, and urbanization, either to support the capitalist development, according to the institutionalist theories, or to protect the interests of an emerging capitalist class, as Neo-Marxists argue. In either case, though, these frameworks center an analysis of the intersection of market power and state formation. To understand how economic changes help birth the modern state, we have to turn back the clock to a pivotal shift in European history, the Commercial Revolution. Beginning in the 11th century and accelerating through the 13th and 14th centuries, Europe experienced a dramatic revival of long-distance trade routes. This wasn't just an increase in goods changing hands, it was a transformation in how wealth was generated, accumulated, and protected. Merchant networks linked Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa with northern trading hubs like Bruges and Lübeck. These trade corridors, often facilitated by overland caravans and coastal shipping, fueled the rise of market towns and urban centers. And these cities quickly emerged as political actors in their own right. Perhaps the clearest example of these new actors was the Hanseatic League, a powerful alliance of merchant towns stretching from the North Sea to the Baltic, and the independent Italian city-states like Florence, where merchant families like the Medici held political power and bankrolled both governments and popes. These urban spaces carved out degrees of autonomy from feudal lords, creating new forms of governance based not on ownership of land or military service, but on contracts, credit, and civic institutions. Guilds regulated trade, issued charters, and even negotiated treaties. Cities built walls not just for protection, but to mark their jurisdictional independence. Meanwhile, the broader European feudal society, which, as we consider in another video, was based on obligations between lords and vassals, began to erode. As trade expanded and monetization spread, land rents began to be paid in cash rather than in labor. This shift, known as commutation, allowed lords to hire soldiers instead of relying on feudal levies, and it allowed peasants to buy their way out of obligations. This monetization of social obligations also strengthened emerging state structures, which could now tax income and trade rather than relying solely on feudal dues. The growing use of money, contracts, and markets thus transformed local economies. And perhaps more importantly, they also restructured social hierarchies, paving the way for new political logics rooted in commerce instead of custom. In short, cities became both the engines and the laboratories of political innovation. They needed rules for trade, systems for taxation, and mechanisms to settle disputes. And in doing so, they laid the foundational stones for what would later become the modern state. So, how do we get from bustling medieval market towns to centralized states with parliaments, tax structures, and standing armies? According to new institutionalist thinkers, especially Nobel laureate Douglas North, the answer lies in how societies developed institutions to lower transaction costs and stabilize economic exchange. North argued that markets don't flourish on their own. They need rules, predictable, enforceable, and widely understood. In this view, states emerge as a solution to the problem of economic coordination in complex, urbanizing societies. In medieval cities, merchants faced enormous risks: piracy, currency fluctuation, fraud, and so on. In this context, who do you trust, especially in a world without standardized contracts, national currencies, or systems of legal enforcement? States, North argues, developed to reduce uncertainty in precisely these areas. By providing legal frameworks, enforcing property rights, regulating currencies, and standardizing weights and measures, the state reduces friction in economic life. Let's take 17th century England as an example. Here, the Glorious Revolution of 1688 didn't just change who sat on the throne, it redefined the institutional balance between the parliament and the monarchy. It created a credible commitment that property would be protected from arbitrary confiscation. That, in turn, encouraged investment and allowed England to develop deep capital markets and fund imperial expansion. A few decades later, the creation of the Bank of England allowed the state to borrow money on favorable terms from private lenders, thanks to institutional trust and legal predictability. North and Weingast famously call this the revolution in credibility. So, in this framework, the modern state doesn't emerge primarily out of warfare or class conflict. It evolves precisely because it becomes useful to economic actors. It enables markets to grow by offering institutional certainty, especially in finance, contract enforcement, and public infrastructure. Thus, while North doesn't deny the role of war or coercion entirely, he emphasizes the rational institutional adaptation to economic needs as the key driver. But there's an important caveat here. North's institutionalist theory tends to see the state as neutral, serving society as a whole by maximizing economic efficiency. It downplays power asymmetries, social conflict, and coercion. But what if the state didn't emerge to serve markets, but to serve those who owned them? While new institutionalists like North see the state as a kind of public good, a neutral referee that helps markets function, Neo-Marxist theories challenge that image. For them, the modern state didn't emerge to serve society or to promote efficiency. It emerged to serve capital, to protect the interests of dominant economic classes during the transition from feudalism to capitalism. At the core of this view is the argument that state formation and capitalist development are deeply intertwined, and that the state plays an active role in creating and maintaining conditions for capital accumulation. As feudal bonds unraveled and markets expanded, land began to be enclosed. These were not voluntary reforms. The enclosure movement in England, for instance, involved the violent eviction of peasants from common lands. The displaced people became a new wage-dependent labor force, the proletariat, that could now be hired by capitalist farmers or factory owners. The state's role here was decisive. It passed laws to protect private property claims and used force to suppress resistance. In this sense, the state wasn't a neutral umpire, it was capitalism's enforcer. In other words, as theorists like Nicholas Poulantzas argue, the capitalist state is not just reactive, it's structurally biased to maintain the dominance of capital while appearing to serve the general interest. Neo-Marxists emphasize the role of the fiscal state. As the state began to centralize, it needed money to fund bureaucracies, militaries, and expansion. And to finance this, it turned to credit markets controlled by wealthy elites, further expanding the power and influence of the financiers. From the neo-Marxist perspective, this created a powerful alliance between states and financial capital. The state borrowed from the capitalists, protected their interests abroad through colonial conquest, and built infrastructure that served trade and extraction rather than public welfare. The state also helped resolve the contradictions of capitalism, managing labor unrest, bailing out financial crises, and opening foreign markets when domestic ones became saturated. This aligns with the argument from world systems theorists like Emanuel Wallerstein, who saw the modern state system as a political arm of the global capitalist economy. So from this perspective, the modern state is not a neutral institution, it's a class project shaped by the needs of capital and legitimized through ideologies of order, nationalism, and development. But unlike institutionalists who emphasize internal development, neo-Marxists also point outward. They argue that the state's role in managing capitalism extends beyond borders through imperialism, colonialism, and dependency, an argument we consider in another video. We've now explored two major economic theories of state formation, each offering a distinct lens through which we can understand the rise of the modern state. Let's take a moment to step back and compare them. New institutionalism argues that the state evolved to reduce transaction costs and solve coordination problems in increasingly complex economic systems. As trade, finance, and urbanization expanded, merchants and rulers needed more predictable rules. Institutions, laws, courts, bureaucracies, and so on, helped to reduce transaction costs and increase trust in economic exchange. In this view, the state is fundamentally a market facilitator. It emerges not from coercion or conflict, but from mutual benefit, a rational response to the demands of a growing capitalist economy. By contrast, for neo-Marxists, the modern state isn't neutral or rational in a universal sense. It's a class-based and deeply political system. The state forms in response to the structural needs of capital to enclose land, discipline labor, secure property, and align taxation and credit systems with elite interests. In other words, the state doesn't just serve markets, it serves the dominant classes who own and shape them, and its institutions reflect power struggles, not consensus. These approaches aren't just abstract ideas, they shape how we understand everything from the modern legal system to welfare policy, international finance, and even political legitimacy. So, when we look at the modern state, not just in Europe but globally, we should ask, is this institution promoting collective well being, or is it entrenching a particular set of power structures under the guise of order and progress? Both perspectives we've considered here agree that economic transformation, especially trade, finance, and urban growth, played a central role in forming the modern state, but they sharply diverge on who benefits, who decides, and who pays the price.